As Americans living in the secular world, we're familiar with the term mediator. The American author F. Scott Fitzgerald believed a mediator to be a person with the ability to hold two opposing ideas in his mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Mediation challenges participants to move beyond the either-or mindset and reach an agreement acceptable to both sides. It is a tool used by labor unions, governments, and individuals, to name only a few. Over many years, in many countries, poll after poll has agreed on a person they named the greatest mediator of the 20th century. Let me tell you a little about him to see whether you recognize him. He was expelled from college. He became president of a group the government ruled treasonous and was arrested and charged with high treason. After acquittal, he left the country for military training, expecting an armed struggle. Back in his country, he was arrested for conspiring to overthrow the government and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, extraordinarily, 22 years later, talks between him and the president of that country took place in the prison. 4 years after that, he was released from prison, and within the following 4 years, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and elected president of that country, South Africa. The man, of course, is Nelson Mandela. As a mediator, what goals did he achieve? He was freed from prison. He renounced the planned armed struggle. His organization, the African National Congress, was reinstated, and most extraordinarily, majority rule was adopted, ending the apartheid system which had existed since 1948. But the definition of a biblical mediator is not the same as it is in the secular world. While there are two parties involved, in the New Testament, Christ is the one and only mediator between God and man. He brings reconciliation between God and man by his all-perfect atoning sacrifice. We don't have trouble accepting that premise. Jesus literally became one of us, a human being. And we know that there is nothing between ourselves and our Savior. He fully identified himself with struggling humanity and carried that humanity back into heaven, where he now sits on the right hand of God the Father. And if we are true Christians, there can be nothing between us and the Holy Spirit either. Our very bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So if we allow him in, he will actually live within us. But what about God the Father? Do you remember the disciples asking Jesus about him? They were very comfortable with God the Son, but when it came to the end of Jesus' life, they still had many questions about God the Father. Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus famously answered, "Don't you know me, Philip? If you have seen me, You have seen the Father. But many of us still picture Jesus as someone up there in glory pleading our case before the Father. As if the Father doesn't love us and accept us himself. As if he needs someone in between, a mediator. In today's Old Testament lesson from Exodus, that was the story of the first time in history when humans asked for someone in between. They wanted a mediator. They wanted Moses to talk to God for them because they were afraid of the thunder and the lightning and the booming voice. But Moses was not. So Moses became the mediator between God and the Israelites. But bear in mind that it was the Israelites who needed the mediator. They were the ones who wanted someone in between. That wasn't God's idea, but he accommodated their needs. Later, when the sanctuary service was instituted, the high priest became the mediator between God and man in the temple. In that temple, as you saw in the video, a veil separated the Holy of Holies, the earthly dwelling place of God's presence, from the rest of the temple where the men dwelt. The significance was that sin had separated man from God. And it had, hadn't it? Because of the people's sin, they were so terrified that they begged Moses to step in between them and God first, and then sin had indeed separated God from his precious people, and that's why the only person permitted to pass beyond the veil was the high priest. And then only one day out of each year, he entered into God's presence on the Day of Atonement, the day which marked the removal of sin for all of Israel. Nobody else could go behind the veil. He was the mediator, the high priest. He was the only mediator. He was the only person in between. But what happened? That veil was destroyed on the day Jesus died, torn in two from top to bottom. Because after Jesus died, there was no longer any need for a sanctuary or sacrifices or high priests. After his death, we were expected to understand that there was no reason to be afraid of God, and that we could approach him personally without hesitation at any time. In fact, Jesus took the issue further when he said to his disciples, "On that day you will ask in my name." And I am not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. I won't have to do that, for the Father himself loves you. There's no longer a need for anyone, an in-between, a mediator. Jesus has shown us that it was never God who needed a mediator in the first place. Each of us, everyone, is now a priest. Everyone has been freely and openly invited to boldly approach the throne of God for themselves. As I learned about Nelson Mandela, I was struck by some of the comparisons between the character of Mandela and Jesus. Both served as models of integrity. and of incorruptibility. Both served as models of willingness to reconcile with former adversaries, and both served as models of personal sacrifice in the cause of dismantling entrenched systems of oppression. And both spoke a message of forgiveness and equality. I was especially struck by two quotes by Nelson Mandela. The first was, "A leader is like a shepherd." Like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon the others follow, not realizing that all along they are being directed from behind. The second quote, "There can be no greater gift than that of giving one's time and energy to helping others without expecting anything in return." But although there are comparisons, there is one overwhelming difference. There will always be a need for mediators in our earthly affairs. People who come between and help those on opposite sides of an issue to reach agreement. But Jesus died to show us the whole truth about God. That God is not arbitrary or unforgiving or vengeful or severe. Jesus died to show us that we have no reason to be afraid of the Father. The veil of fear that separated us from the Father was torn in two at the moment of Jesus' death. And nothing would please God's heart more than to hear us say, "You want to know what comes between me and my God? Nothing."